Tent Beach Rain, a short story. 1. Tent. The blood bond extends into the infrared. There are communications not detected by the senses. Stuart was already alert to it. There were odd aspects to his friend Tudor. Tudor was one of twins, with his brother Argyle, Argie, and from Stuart's perspective they had a fettered family. Privilege spoils the mitten. Privilege spoils the mitten. Their father was a faceless Tory. He owned racehorses, ex-military. In the rough-shod corridors of college, Tudor, the first time out of home, struggled without his mother. That's where Stuart met him. Tudor was an awkward gorp. Rich kids linger lonely on the campus of the common man. No matter that he failed everything, his family brought him a stately brick home in the old suburbs, and he lived there with his dog, a purebred King Charles Spaniel named Travis. Stuart had thus known him for years after college, on and off, and long enough to know he was an odd bod with premonitions. It happened again the day when Stuart was visiting, the day the brother Argyle brought around the tent. Tudor was well-bred and sure-footed in his own domain. All his experiments at living with plebeians were unsuccessful. He was accustomed to strict order. He wore cravats. At college, he had been called a young fuddy-duddy. The joke was that he had been, as people said, toilet-trained at gunpoint. Yet Stuart found him entertaining and essentially kind-hearted. He served tea, Earl Grey. His sense of humour was perversely upper class. This day, Tudor suddenly looked up. Then the phone rang. It was his brother, Argie. But the sequence, Stuart noted, wasn't quite natural. One brother looked up a full 5 seconds before the other brother rang. There was also something creepy about Tudor, people had been saying forever. He disappeared in the night. He kept odd hours. He talked to himself in the dark. A more generous assessment would say he was an eccentric, a young one. Here was a daily instance, Stuart noted, where Tudor displayed a creepy talent. Argyle, in any case, rang to say he was coming around for 2 reasons, 1 to pick up Travis, and 2 to deliver a tent. The eventuality was that he had purchased a new tent. He was handing his down to Tudor. There was an occasion gathering, the long weekend. Stuart had not met Argyle before. When he arrived, in barely 15 minutes, he emerged as a mirror splash of Tudor himself. Identical twins. Stuart always knew Tudor had a twin brother, but he didn't know he was a total zizajee. Stuart had to resist and not utter cliches about it. Tudor was pasty and slightly blonde. So was Argyle. Tudor had beady eyes and spoon-shaped fingertips. So did his brother. Argyle was, moreover, collecting Travis, so that Tudor could escape to Long Wattle Bay, where they don't have dogs, even purebreds, in the camping grounds anymore. It went unremarked, but Stuart could not help but notice that the tent in question was one of the most expensive money could buy. It was the deluxe design. Tudor's family buys the latest goods. Argyle, the very doppelganger, he even dressed much the same, didn't stay for long, but drove off with Travis and his Ferrari. He was well adapted. He looked like a successful version of Tudor. It was after he'd departed that Tudor said, "You should come down to Long Wattle Bay. We used to stay down there when we were children. Have you ever been to Long Wattle Bay?" Stuart could hardly imagine Tudor going camping, but the tent indicated he did it in style. My family owned property down at Long Wattle Bay, he explained. We used to stay there, at my Uncle Rooney's house, but it was sold after he passed away years ago. I stay in the camping ground these days. It's quite comfortable. He explained that he was a beachcomber. I like to reconnect with the sea, he said. 2. Beach. Long Wattle Bay is appropriately horseshoe-shaped, for in the salty domain of brisk winds and long rolling waves, horse owners like to train their mares on the unimpeded lengths of hard sand. It was once a cheap holiday haven. The gentry brought up the surrounding lands and approaches. Transport tycoons had architect-designed monstrosities hanging on the cliff tops with views to the Abalone Islands full of water birds. The camping ground has all modern conveniences. As Stuart had suspected, the tent was spacious and space-age, the next but latest thing in glamour camping. He brought only his bedding and his binoculars. I'm surprised there are not more campers, he observed, looking around, for the long weekend. Tudor's idea of camping was uncluttered, avoiding the riffraff, and more or less an extension of being at home. He brought all his familiarities, his favourite cushion, his teapot, and nor did camping mean he could dress without a cravat. The beach was only a wander away. There were no swimmers, too cold, only lonely figures in the sea spray. Tudor took beachcombing seriously. There were good phases of the day's round cycle for it, and good tides to catch. My Uncle Rooney owned a big house here in Long Wattle Bay once, he said again. It's still here. It overlooks the sea. He was in the Navy, an officer in the Navy. We used to visit him, stay with him on the holidays, Argie and I. The sea air had him recollecting. What was it like growing up as an identical twin? Stuart asked. He had been wanting to ask. Fun, sometimes, Tudor smiled. On the Saturday afternoon, they went for an extended walk along the hard sands with dark waves washing in. Often Tudor walked ahead. He had an eye for cowrie shells and gnarls of driftwood and crab ankles and fish heads and curious oddments from long-ago container ships passing by in the sea lanes. Beachcombing ran in the family. His Uncle Rooney had been a keen beachcomber. In the house where Tudor and Argyle spent their holidays, there was a room with wide windows, with a collection of crab ankles and fish heads and all the found items. Of this he had vivid recollections. As boys, he and Argyle played among the detritus of the sea. Were your parents there? Stuart asked, wondering at the full picture. No, Tudor said. They'd usually go to Tahiti. They'd leave us with Uncle Rooney. He explained that there were caves up in the cliffs. He and his brother knew many wholesome adventures. The nostalgia was easily explained. Why did he keep revisiting the beach of Long Wattle Bay, even after the home was sold and he resorted to glamour camping? He was drawn back to his place of nurture, the place of his salt. As they walked against the wind along the beach, Tudor talked about his illustrious uncle. Uncle Rooney had sailed the 7 seas. He joined the Navy when he was 19. He was in intelligence, naval intelligence, Tudor explained. A lieutenant. He knew vice admirals and commodores. His house was a nautical array to his young nephews. It had been a long while since Stuart himself had taken any sea air. He thought the weekend away would do him well. He had not seen a seagull for several years. He too was happy to reconnect with the sea. The vista of the windy beach explained something of the empty wisps within his friend. It is not a hospitable beach for all of that. It is more a beach for loners, although there is the question of whether an identical twin is ever really alone. It was better that Tudor had a background. Stuart had decided Tudor's family was, as we've said, fettered. His father sounded like an unconsidered disciplinarian with a Victorian streak, but there was a beach of driftwood treasures too. The father had the boys learn piano, but he made them compete against each other, and now neither of them, Tudor said, could play a note. There was a piano in his uncle's house. His mother played piano. They walked up from the beach into the dunes where the sand drifts were consolidated by rough tusks of vegetation. They looked out at the sea and the sands, both wide. Stuart took up his binoculars. "It's a pity they don't have dogs in the camping ground anymore," Tudor said. "Travis would love this." They walked back to the Taj Mahal of tents. "When I was a boy," Stuart offered of his own accord, "our family would go up to Lindsay River on fishing trips. Not that we ever caught much." Tudor was uninterested. He was a snob. Long Wattle Bay had changed. The shoreline streets were well made now. Power lines. There were realtors. Strangers prowling in SUVs. He sighed because he found the sea air and glamping wearying. He needed tea when they got back from the beach walk. "I'm not sure why I kept coming back here every holiday," he said, more or less to himself rather than to Stuart. "I guess it's a habit." He had much the same thought when they settled down to sleep that night, listening to the thudding wavescape in the near distance. Stuart had no other friends quite like Tudor. "Does your brother ever come with you?" he asked, a natural issue. "No," said Tudor. "He likes camping, but he never comes here to Long Wattle Bay." In the morning they walked the beach again, treading through the kelp. 3. Rain. A storm coincided with Sunday sunset. It began as a smell in the air. The fat pelicans knew it was on its way. The rest of the weekend would be a washout. There were not many campers already. By midday Monday, the whole coast would be abandoned. The rain set in. It was cold, coastal rain. Rather than sit all evening dreary in the tent, Tudor said, "Let's go for a drive." He had his old BMW. It had been his father's. He spoke about it like a fetish item. It was certainly sturdy in the rain. They could drive along to the lookout and sit in the BMW and watch the storm against the Black Sea and listen to jazz on radio waves skipping across the water. It was Tudor's idea of something fitting. Jazz-lit storm watching in Dad's old Beamer. It would appeal perhaps to a retired gentleman who imagined he was living in an old movie, Stuart thought at the time. But Tudor was in his mid-20s, a young fuddy-duddy. It was a wonder he didn't smoke a pipe. Yet the rain was ugly as the night grew deep. They drove instead, unscheduled, to Uncle Rooney's house. They parked outside where they could see it in the dark. It overlooked, as promised, the sprawling waters of the bay. Prime real estate. There were no lights on inside. 7 bedrooms and an atrium, Tudor said. The collection of beach-combed treasures, the crab ankles and fish heads, where he and his brother had played, was in the room at the front, clearly to be seen, even in the shadows and the rain-falling squalls. There used to be a tennis court, he added, nodding, where those garden beds are now. Uncle Rooney and the Commodores would play tennis on sunny days. The rain is in the mood to remember. Tudor's mouth hangs almost open. He stares ahead. He and Stuart sit in the dark car as the rain clouds keep crossing Long Wattle Bay. Stuart was still struck by the image of Argyle. Tudor went to college. Argyle went to business school. Their mother was their shelter. Their father was strict, a craven whore of empire. Horses. He laundered money for wealthy Arabs. After a long time listening to the rain, in a spell, Tudor started saying to his friend, You know, when we were boys, people would come from the Navy. Yes, said Stuart. No, said Tudor. Special people. What do you mean? Asked Stuart. Special. Tudor straightened himself in his seat without losing the reverie of the rain beat. They were interested in me and Argy, he said. The whole conversation was punctuated with pauses and rain. Interested? How? Experiments. Experiments? Some people think that identical twins can have psychic powers. Really? And there were people from the Navy? Yes. What do you mean? When we stayed at Uncle Rooney's, people from the Navy would come. They'd come to see me and Argy and ask us things and put us in situations and watch us. Do you mean the Navy conducted experiments on you when you were kids? Tudor now nodded to the side of the building, usually in that room at the side. The billiards room, it used to be called, but there was no billiards table anymore. What did they want? Wondered Stuart, thinking it a grim wondering. They were interested in identical twins, Tudor explained again. His friend had to think about this at some length. And how do you feel about all that, Tudor? He asked, finally, frowning. Tudor was lost. Sometimes they tell Argy and me completely different things and set us up to fight just to watch us, he was remembering. Then, after another rain break, he murmured, they gave us things to make us dream. Stuart hesitated to break the stream of the wet, wind-screened memories smattering there in the house-battering winds, but he asked, and where was your Uncle Rooney? Well, he wasn't there. These were special people from the Navy. I mean, Uncle Rooney was there, somewhere else in the house, or playing tennis with the Commodore. People in uniform. Yes. Big sloshes of rain now fell, along with tree tips washed loose by the sandy wind face. Uncle Rooney's house was almost being battered. The seats in the BMW held the young men in comfort as they both sat in silence. Tudor, in the driver's seat, kept the heater going and the wipers on low. That was as much as he wanted to say about the matter. He changed the subject, continuing. The piano had been in that room too, the so-called billiards room. I thought I was getting somewhere on the piano, but Argy said I was terrible, he related. The car was their cocoon as the beachfront storm swept through. It must have been hard enough growing up as an identical twin, Stuart said, knowing it was inadequate when he said it. It was fun sometimes, Tudor related again. Sometimes I would fool people into thinking I was Argy, and he would do it to me. We did it all the time. How long did this go on? Stuart asked. He meant the experiments, not the foolery. Tudor understood the question. Every holidays, every year. Years? When we were kids, yes. When my parents went to Tahiti. Stuart found a new angle on the young fuddy-duddy's weirdness. Still further they sat and watched Uncle Rooney's house without speaking, and let the rain clouds misbehave overhead. Whole gardens of kelp would be churned from their roots in the sea, and would draw a map of obstacles for beachcombers in the clear aftermath of the morning. Eventually the rain clouds mellowed. Eventually Tudor started up the car to drive back to the Taj Mahal of tents. "But if you ask Archie about it," he said, turning the key, "he'll say it didn't happen. That is one way we are not identical. I remember, and he doesn't."